Most hiring processes are ultimately broken due to them having to manually screen each and every single candidate. So I built an Airtable dashboard that ultimately allows businesses to streamline their operations and save 60 to 80% of the entire hiring process. So let's jump straight into it. My name is Fari, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the entire hiring and screening dashboard that I've ultimately built specifically for Airtable. So if we take a look at this hiring and screening system, we can basically see that the main problem that we're ultimately solving here is ultimately automating the entire screening process, because one of the main issues is manually screening candidates that specific team members may have in terms of going through each and every single application without a streamlined process. So for example, you get someone that hires or someone that applies to have a role in your organization, and then you ultimately don't have a centralized place to ultimately keep track of this candidate and also what their unique abilities are. So this system entirely just solves that. So if we jump straight into this dashboard, we could see how it ultimately functions, which we have all the intake forms. So we basically run an intake form, and through that intake form we basically store it on a database, and through this database we ultimately have this interface that allows us to see the applications that are ultimately running, such that if we're looking for a specific role, we can ultimately post that specific intake form, and then from that intake form we can have automations that fill in the database that we have, and then it is populated over here. So the cool thing about this that ultimately solves the problem for people that are looking for specific roles and just managing this entire candidate process is that you're ultimately able to see which specific role has been applied for. So we can have filters over here that ultimately show which specific role, and then we can filter it over here, but that is not the most important thing. The main thing about this is ultimately centralizing the entire screening and hiring process into one consolidated place, and this ultimately means that it is saving your team time simply because we're able to then streamline the process. And instead of having this whole manual process where you have to ask, or you have to consolidate with your team to ask, hey, is this candidate suit for this role, where can I possibly fit them, you ultimately have this in one centralized spot. And all this, you have your job descriptions, which are also super important, and your requirements as well. So basically you can filter requirements and have specific requirements that you will have. But the key thing about here that is super important specifically for this automation process is ultimately the job summary. I think one of the most important facets, or the most important elements of this, is ultimately having this AI that is run. We're ultimately just using the Airtable AI for this specific one, because this is not the main internal one that we use. This is just a shell one in terms of what we're solving for in this specific instance. So then we basically have this job summary where we basically use specific fields. So for example, we take the job description and the requirements, and we ultimately consolidate it with this AI that ultimately runs a summary for the specific role. And this is key simply because now you have this consolidated summary that you can read for your specific team members, and this is specific to the fields that they have ultimately inputted specifically on the intake form. And through that you're then able to filter candidates on keywords as well, which we don't have on this specific one, but the one that we use internally, we do have the specific keywords that are ultimately filtered from here. Then we also have a requirement analysis, which is also super important. So for example, this is based off of the skills that you're actively seeking for in terms of the role that you're applying for, so that it's just easier to then filter and also consolidate it as well. And then we also just have the manner in which we can track the applications over here, and the mode in terms of the medium that we're using in terms of the application, where we're having the interviews all in one consolidated place, so that you can just hand this off to your team members and they can ultimately be able to filter through each and every single candidate. So this is basically the dashboard that ultimately governs it and shows you each and every single candidate that comes in, and also uses these specific tags in terms of being able to easily find. So report is RTP001, which is ultimately helps you to be able to sort and filter it much more seamlessly. So you have your job board over here, and then you can just go to applications. So these are basically the applications that your team would ultimately be seeing on a day-to-day. Then you can also see which ones, this is ultimately your source of truth, in the sense that you can see which applications are under which specific stage in the pipeline. So for example, you have your submitted, and then you have all the way to your accepted, which is also super important, because each and every single day your team will be able to see automatically which candidate is in which stage of the pipeline, instead of you having to manually just input it. And I think this is super key, especially if you're running a big operation, in the sense that you have 50 people applying each and every single day. You're ultimately gonna scale. That ultimately is a problem, because you're gonna need to scale your output in terms of automating this entire process, and you can only do it manually for so long before you ultimately have to scale and bring in automation for this. So this process ultimately solves that, in the sense that each and every single day you have a dedicated manager that comes in. They ultimately look at this specific tool, and they ultimately are able to see which candidate is in which specific stage in the pipeline, which also ultimately just reduces friction points in the sense that you're not constantly scratching your head asking where is this specific candidate, what are the details as well. You just ultimately have them in one consolidated place. So right now we only have dummy data. Then you can also see as well, in the sense, the total interviews, which are also going to be super key as well. So just having this mode as a source of truth is also going to be super important for your team, especially because you're going to be filtering through a lot of candidates. And how can you ultimately streamline this entire process? You need to also ultimately be taking a framework from one of my videos, where you ultimately are able to consolidate everything through structures and workflows, and how these workflows govern the entire onboarding and also offboarding process as well, in terms of your team as well, which I will also just go into in another video, in terms of the offboarding process, which I think needs to also be shown a lot more light. And just I think that is also equally as important. So then here we just ultimately have all your submissions, which is not super important. Each and every single submission that you have just ultimately just comes in. You don't have to manually input anything. This ultimately allows you to scale a lot further as well, in terms of your insights. So we also just have user roles. So basically each and every single role that is on this specific database, they ultimately are assigned a role, and you can see all the different properties, which are also ultimately not as important. But you also have your count. So basically these are your your performance metrics specific to your candidates and the people that are using this specific database. You can basically have specific performance KPIs that you can ultimately set and be able to see them. So this is your source of truth, and you can have these specific pie charts to ultimately see, for example, we see this related job posting, which is web app developer. We see one record, and that accounts for 11.11% of the total applications that have been run within the specific organizations. So this is just more so this is more so just a shell of the entire thing that we have, simply because I just have to show this one, and it's my first time fully showing out in terms of building each and every single day. So I'm still trying to figure out what I can show and not show. So I'm trying to just try to strike the balance in that as well. So basically this is what we have on this one. Then one of the most important insights that I think is super key, especially for teams that are scaling, is ultimately having these insights. These insights ultimately are ultimately going to govern how you're able to assess this candidate. For example, in one of the other systems that we have entire intake form, and then we also have entire summaries that are generated by this chatbot as well, that ultimately our client also sees. So they are basically able to filter specifically to what their requirements are, and also the videos as well. So they have specific instances for tagging as well, specifically for the videos, so that they can just easily filter through candidates much more seamlessly than they would if they had to do this entire manual process. And I think automating this process is ultimately key for scale, especially if you're a small stage business and you ultimately want to take it up a notch. And I think Airtable, having it in Airtable, is ultimately what's going to be a key factor in terms of scalability into the future. And you can also just export, print these charts specifically for your key KPIs as well. And also you can go through your application status. So I'm just using another account. This is not the main account, so this is why this is not showing. And then we also have your interviews. Basically, this is your interviews that your team will be seeing. So specifically, if someone has a interview on this specific date, you can see the job posting and also the interview date, and then you can just expand on this, and then you can get more information, and this will ultimately be filtered to your team, ultimately streamlining the entire process so that your team only has to handle the things that they need to do, not always just constantly following up as well, which is in another system as well that we're actively building out. And then also just conduct, interview conducts, which I think is also super important, just having a comprehensive outlook or comprehensive take on this, in the sense that we're covering each and every single possibility, because the more possibilities we're able to cover, the more value we're able to bring, and also the less friction that we're also able to solve and also create. So less friction is good, and creating more friction is not bad, is ultimately bad. So we want to create less friction as possible through this. So basically thinking about every single thing that could possibly happen under the sun. So for example, conduct, you see your interview location, which I think is also super important, just also for the team to know as well. So this is all just dummy data, and then we ultimately have applications so that they're all related to each other. And then also just making sure that the entire process is streamlined. Essentially, this is the entire build process that we have. We can just run through the pages real quick that we have specifically for this. We have 3-4 different tables that ultimately reference each other. So for my hardcore builders that like to run different types of calculations, some hardcore calculations and things like that, we also have specific things that we are also relating to each other, because I think relation is one of the most important things as well in terms of building this out, to make sure that each and every single table is related to each other, from the job posting to the application to the users to the interviewers and the feedback as well. So just this is also ultimately for the people that are keenly interested in how it ultimately works on the back end. So essentially, this is how this entire system goes. Ultimately, it is built and made to ensure that the screening process is not biased. It is ultimately as streamlined as possible, and making sure that your team and the businesses that we're working with are ultimately removed from the day-to-day process of manually inputting data, but ultimately just scaling as well, because the further we help them scale, the more value we're ultimately creating. So, like I said, this is just my first time fully showing something, and I'm just showing the shell of it with some dummy data in terms of showing how we're thinking about things, and also building for specific instances. So this is my first one, so do please bash me if you will if I did a bad job. I'm still learning. This is my first one fully doing and figuring out, so pretty interesting. So if you guys have any questions, comments, or anything that you guys would like to learn a lot more in terms of what I'm building and showing, because I'm going to be showing and building a lot more, just trying to strike the balance in terms of what I can show and what I can't show. So this, of course, I can kind of show, because every single data, all the data here is ultimately dummy data, so I can ultimately share it, but ultimately I need to strike the balance and also be able to communicate it a lot better. So this uses Killer Chaos OS internal build methodology, where we ultimately are able to think from first principles of asking what are the requirements and how can we remove the requirements, in the sense that we're ultimately building what is ultimately needed at the core, and then reasoning up from there. And then we're able to build every single thing, connecting the different automations that we'll need in terms of, making sure that the triggers are set in terms of, the intake forms coming in, and also just outbound in terms of, say we get someone in and then we ultimately need to send them an email for confirmation, so that we're also just sending that out each and every single time that a new form is submitted, so that the team is also alerted in terms of what they need to do and the steps that they need to take. So yeah, this is my first time showing this, and I hope I get better at it pretty quick and pretty soon. But rapid iteration and just keep on posting each and every single day, and I know that I will get a lot better at showing a lot of things and also building. And I know that into the future we're gonna get to the grand vision of Killer Chaos OS, where, like I always say, we're gonna be inspiring millions of people and also redefining industries. But that ultimately starts here, and in today's video, this is what I have been covering. So if you guys want to connect with me on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and I will see you guys in the next video.